Hi guys, it's the acid capitalist feeling fatigued. I am up in the sky of London, the world tour drawing to a close, leaving for Dublin, and then the wonderful festival of Kilkenny for the weekend, Paris and St. Bart's. So a change in the usual schedule for the podcast. I did a wonderful conference with Stansberry back a week ago with Dan Ferris. We got about 45 minutes. I think it's fun. I hope you enjoy. And then we'll come back at you next week with normal service, and hopefully Mr. Sweeney will be delivering some alchemy.
Our guest Hugh Hendry is a writer, risk taker, and thought leader on global capital markets. In 2005, he founded Eclectic Asset Management, a hedge fund that delivered uncorrelated returns to clients for over a decade. His prescience in anticipating the great financial crisis of 2008 earned him a reputation as a prophetic iconoclast, as a leading investor in luxury real estate and a social media sensation. Hugh Hendry is now influencing a new generation of market makers with his successful podcast, viral social media posts, and appearances on Bloomberg, The Economist, and Institutional Investor, among others being Stansberry Investor Hour. Please help me welcome Mr. Hugh Hendry. Good to see you. So in this case, you get all this music, and you actually get somebody who looks like a rock star this time. So Hugh, good to see you.
Apart from that photograph, I mean, there is a conspiracy to find these. I have changed appearance. I think it's a security measure. I'm avoiding being taken hostage. Also, it is my great daily desire that tomorrow I'm going to be younger than I am today. So when I see these photographs which have been taken from previous times, who is that guy? Anyway, it's a bit like Ayn Rand. Who is John Gall? Who is Hugh Hendry?
Who is Hugh Hendry?
Let's find out.
Are we going to say who is Hugh Hendry in the same manner, I wonder, one day? So the first thing that we have got to talk about, mind you, Hugh has been on the Stansberry Investor Hour not once, but twice. And this topic always comes up. So this is where I have to begin. There is inflation, right? There is inflation. We have an 8% CPI. It's the highest it's been in 40 years. People are paying a lot more for rent. Gas prices are up. Everything at the grocery store is up, where I go to shop. No?
Hey, Dan, if you say so. This damn inflation, I get it. It's like having a hair at the back of your throat. It makes me kind of cough it up. Are prices elevated? Yes, of course they are. What is inflation? We have a wonderfully robust definition which has stood the test of time from Milton Friedman. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. And so the inflation that I, if you will, have disdain for our fascination presently, the inflation that I don't see is the inflation of tomorrow. Now, that's conjecture. I mean, one man's conjecture. But I don't see it as I look 18 months ahead. And indeed, I'm joined in the majesty of the US Treasury bond markets and the curvature, the impending, heavens, we've had already recorded 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. We are in a recession, which is only going to, I believe, is only going to be more and more aggravated. So this is the most forecast, if you will, most predictable, rather serious economic recession that is due to reach landfall. I believe it actually has, but it will be revealed in the slowness of Federal Reserve time.
So simply put, you don't. Milton Friedman is saying inflation is a monetary phenomenon. I think he said something like, in all times and places. In fact, you simply do not see the increase in money and credit that signals to you that inflation is the genuine Milton Friedman article.
Indeed. And so, again, this, like everything, it requires an elaboration. And at that point, it reveals just the paucity of knowledge with regard to money.
I know.
Right? I kind of play around. I believe there are no more than 5 people in the world who understand money. And I point out to you, the Fed talk about financial conditions, not monetary conditions. And I think there's actually a justifiable sleight of hand going on there. But monetary conditions, let me see if I can be precise. There are effectively 3 forms of money. And let's work from the inside to the outside, why not? The one that we commonly are all aware of is the purview of the Federal Reserve. It is onshore, the onshore regulated banking system, where deposits are insured by the Treasury system. That system is not generating monetary abundance. Period. We know that. We have data, lots of data. Ever since the event. What was the event? 15 years ago, we had de facto bankruptcy of the global banking system. Okay? Rather tames your appetite for monetary excess. Okay? Bank loans represent monetary creation, and bank lending on that domestic front has been circa 6. Inflation running 9, 10, the mismatch requires discretionary spending to be cut. What are we seeing? Across the board, discretionary spending is being cut. So there's one thing, okay. The second, and let's call that form of money quasi-private, because it requires private agents to extend commercial loans, and public because it is very much regulated and nudged by policymakers, okay. Now, because we've not had vim, I'm trying to use other words than velocity, but because we've not had profound expansion in that avenue, the Feds have resorted to pure public monetary creation. Quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is simply the expansion of banking reserves. There's been a lot of that. $9 trillion, almost 50% of GDP. But it's latent. The Fed is essentially, it's like the parents of adolescent kids, and you're leaving town, and rather than locking up the liquor cabinet, you filled the garage with beer. The beer is banking reserves. And you said, kids, this one's on you. Right. Have fun. Except the last weekend, the kids really almost burnt the house down, and I just can't face it again. Hard to imagine kids would do that, but there you go. Which is to say, but the banking sector said, no. And so the Federal Reserve effectively has created $9 trillion of laundromat tokens. Now, it does have potency, and we'll return to that in the context of Japan. Okay? So I would say to you, 2 forms of money, nada. I don't see the monetary exuberance that could maintain this elevation of prices, not only this year, but next year and the year after.
All right, so if I could cut in then, what I'm hearing is the money's there, it's ready to be lent and spent, but until it is lent and spent, it's not created. We create most of our money through lending in this system, that private system you're talking about. It's not happening. The lending and spending is not creating the multiplier effect.
Indeed.
So number 3.
So number 3 is the Friedman definition. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. We have had asset price inflation. Price of all assets has escalated over the last 15 years. And you can trace that to monetary exuberance in the third form of money, which is pure, unadulterated private money. The repo market, the euro-dollar market, let's call it the matrix, let's call it the dark web that exists offshore. It lacks sovereignty. It's a ledger-based system without restraint. The only restraint is the confidence of your counterparty. If your reputation is good, boom, filled. Okay? That system has generated an abundance of monetary expansion, and it's financed asset prices. It's financed fictional wealth. Now, I'm not talking about fraud. I'm talking about the exuberance and the overstatement of the now into the future. Now, it's that third form of money. That third form of money is contracting rapidly, owing, I believe, to ignorance, misunderstanding. Federal Reserve is a domestic banking regulator. That's how it looks. And you have to look like that. Right. Okay. The episode in the United Kingdom was this enormous fissure. For a second, it revealed itself. That was the repo market. Now, what is happening here? You have assets. So UK pension funds, they have gilts. And you have to hold them in the ordinary course of your business. But you can go to a bank and you can say, hey, gilts, would you give me cash? Would you give me credit? You know, it's like a mortgage. Back in the day, you might have to put 40% equity, then it was 20% equity, then it was 5% equity, then it was no equity. And this market's like, but with a gilt, it's a liquid, risk-free security. You got 100 million pounds sterling of gilts, no problem. Here's 99 million of cash, and go and expand your balance sheet. But when there's one slight doubt about that situation, the conceit and the arrogance that's built into it, boom, it's like, this funny money, these gilts, your paper's no good.
Right, and the analogy here is exactly the same thing that lit the financial crisis at Bear Stearns. What you don't realize is all these companies, especially financial companies, but others too, they're funding their business overnight every day. And under normal circumstances, maybe let's just say you get this ironed out by 8:30 a.m., and absolutely under extreme circumstances by 11 a.m., and in the UK recently, it was not done.
We had almost $1 trillion of repo failure. Counterparties failed to deliver. Why did they fail? Actually, what was happening was the UK pension funds were being kind of assy. They need to hold those treasuries for their statutory requirements. Right. They've got it, and they want to sell something else. And it's like, give me a week. You know, right. Hence the failure. It will be taken care of. That was just that's what this is, the ghost that lies deep within the machine. Yeah. That you never see, you're not meant to see, and boom, you got an indication of its power.
Yeah, there's another ingredient though, right? The interest rate hedges.
Interest rate hedges.
At pension funds. And you know, interest rate hedges at pension funds, you're like, what is that? We never hear about that. And all of a sudden, boom, it's headlines.
Well, let's talk about another area. You talked about inflation, and you talked about the significance of time. I used to be a time investor. Time is very important to me. The yen. What the heck's happening with the yen? Yeah. I thought that was a strong currency. It's on his ass. Okay? It's the repo market. So we talked about the three. Remember, these discussions are not being had in Washington with the Federal Reserve. They're not being had at PIMCO and hedge funds. You know, you require homeless-looking people like me that surf, and somehow I get it, right? So take that with a pinch of salt. We talked about that pure public form of money, bank reserves, which have been neglected. The Fed has tempted the private sector, go on, please, party. No, thank you. In Japan, the banks went, what do you mean this is mine? Like we can do something with this. Let me tell you what they did. They took those bank reserve assets and they took the zillions of JGB very short-term bills and they went into the bank dealer market in New York and they went, hey, can we swap? Can you give me treasuries? And again, like almost a zero haircut. Sure, no problem, okay? And then what you do is you go into China. And the whole notion that the Chinese, the Communist Party, they control credit. Again, these are the blue pills in the matrix that keep you fully invested. No problem here, move on. It's nonsense, right? The world works and marches to the beat of the repo man. Chinese, Japanese, European, American, all the same. Chinese exporter, importer, typically importer, requires dollars. To get dollars, you need dollar collateral. So you go into Tokyo and you do a swap. Now you've got treasury bonds, then you go to another bank, and then that bank gives you the money. This system is crazy.
It's insane.
Yeah. Now, problems, the problems in the property market, the high mark on Chinese property, $90 trillion. I wish I was making that up. I wish I was being dramatic and overstating it. In the context, the high tick on US property, 36, when we were all going, gee, really, 36? 90, right? So you can see, we know from about 18 months ago, Evergrande and stuff, the counterparties within the repo system saying, Chinese exposure. Like, can we start unwinding this? And effectively, Japan and the Japanese banking system had this profound short. It's effectively short the dollar, and it was receiving rates, all the wrong thing. And so it's being absolutely pulled, and that's what you're seeing. Nothing to do with people shorting JGBs. The Japanese bank shorting effectively JGBs. You see, you don't read this stuff. You need the crazy people like me to give you a hint on this stuff.
It sounds like you're telling me, or I'm inferring too, that a complaint of mine might be on your mind, which is that people really do believe that central bankers are in control. I think they lean heavily, for example, traditionally, in the most famous way, they lean heavily on this idea of the Fed put. It sounds like you're telling me that whether it's the Chinese government or the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Japan or whoever, maybe they're not as in control as anybody thinks. Maybe their capacity to do anything to save us from ourselves. I mean, look at what Japan did. They went into the market and spent $30 billion, and from what I've seen on Twitter and a couple of other places, the effect was not quite what they hoped, and it was rather temporary and rather quickly sort of gone.
The $30 billion in the context of what's been leveraged into the euro-dollar system is like literally, it's like a droplet of rain on a hot desert floor. Yeah, what can I avail you with? Yeah, tell me. You're all knowledgeable. When was the last time the Feds got it right? Tell me what it was. Volcker's overstated, but Volcker, let's talk about that. Is 4 or 5% Fed funds rate today the equivalent of 20% Fed funds rate in 1982? I hear a no. I'm going to counter that. Surprise, surprise. Because you've got to take it through the GDP calculator, the stock calculator of debt GDP. All right? What people miss is the 1970s was the final clearing decade from the tumult which had resulted from the bankruptcy of the US banking system in the early 1930s, which is to say, society imposed deleveraging on the financial system. And by the mid-1970s, we finally reached a point of about 1.3 debt to GDP globally. Today, that figure is more like 4. So my point to you is, take 20%, multiply it by 1, let's say, right? 20. Take 5% terminal Fed times 4. You cannot raise rates with that stock. That we were in the perfect position. Perfect's the wrong word. I think we've all heard of financial repression. Financial repression was the solution to the stock debt overhang. Too much debt, not enough GDP. And how we would balance that coming out of the Second World War. And we had decades of negative real rates. Okay? We took it away from savers and we gave it to kind of entrepreneurial types who boosted GDP. That's where we want to be. That's where we were. Going back 6 years ago, we finally got into a kind of range of -2 to 0 real rates. The COVID, the fiscal thing, you can say many things, but the first time they went, you know what, let's boost the economy. We're in a depression. Let's overshoot the thing, right? And back then, an apple's $3 trillion. So any business which is deemed to be risk-free, which is an absurdity, but, becomes like an art project and becomes risk-free is priceless, $3 trillion, $4 trillion. What you're doing there is you're ensuring that the marginal creditor who comes in and buys that stock is ensuring that they will have at maximum a 0 return and most likely a negative return, negative real rate return. And likewise, Treasury's 50 basis points. That's how our system works. But the Feds come in and going, oh, it's inflation. Okay. So I'd ask the Fed to reread the history of 1948. In this country, prices were running at 20% CPI. But I don't hear any of you talking about the great inflation of the late 40s, early 50s. Why? Because there was no monetary accommodation. Dan, tell me, what did Milton Friedman say? Inflation is?
It's a monetary phenomenon in all times and places.
And in the absence of that monetary phenomenon, and with a rather severe recession in the out years of late 48, 49, right. That's why we don't talk about it. Now, where we are now, we've got real rates of 2%.
Right.
Okay, let me finish on that. At 2% with 4 of debt to GDP, you're effectively transferring 8% of GDP from the creditors. From us. Maybe not us. From the good folk in town. Not this cabal of speculators. From the good folk who do good things and who keep getting in the ass, right? We're transferring 8% from their wallets, from their wealth, from their ledger to you guys. Now, I know that's gratifying, but no. Because it's not just you. Who are the other creditors? China, mercantilist nations, people like corporations like Apple who don't invest. Okay, so that's why if you've got 4 times debt, you need negative rates because you start transferring the wealth from China et al. To the ordinary. I mean, the ordinary folk is so dismissive. To the Steve Jobs, to the kids in garages, they can go on and change our lives for the better. That's where we need to be, and that's not where we are. And that's why I feel that when I look forward, I can see dead people.
So what I want to know is, what do we do about all this? Because granted, even though I might think there's inflation, it's not showing up all over the place. And, houses are cheaper than they were a short time ago. They're more expensive than they were a slightly longer time ago. But to that effect, there are what appear to be structural shortages in these things. There's a real sort of bottom-up, fundamental type of a reason to want to say, let's pick on oil. We can pick on anything, pick on a couple things. But oil's the big enchilada, so let's pick on that one. Do I still want to be long oil if there's no monetary inflation? Because there is a bottom-up fundamental supporting it, is there not? What do I do here, Hugh?
Well, raising interest rates is not going to resolve the supply-demand issue with regard to oil.
Right, it's not going to fix supply.
Okay, and indeed the problem with oil is the economic vandalism that I would charge against the Federal Reserve. Since 2008, there have been at least 3 episodes of premature tightening. We live in a world now where, almost 15 years since the apex of the crisis, and we've gone on to record higher nominal GDP versus 2007. But we've never attained the previous growth rate for 40 years. We grew close to 3%. That figure today is 1.5. I would define that as a depression. Why is that happening? It's happening for a myriad of reasons. I'd blame the Chinese, but we would need another 45 minutes to go down that rabbit hole. And really, it is the French and anything coined by the French. I mean, I love the French. I kind of live in a French island. Anyway, forgive me. But one of their former prime ministers, Valéry Giscard, the U.S. has an exorbitant privilege to print dollars on your ass. That's the most ridiculous concept you will ever hear. That's equivalent to someone saying, let's measure M2. Have you seen M2? It's surging. These are asinine comments.
Why?
The U.S. is being crippled by the use of the dollar. I mean, I come to your country and I put it into sterling, and I'm like, oh my God, right? But you guys have got to sell things into international markets. You're dear. You're really, really expensive, and everyone else is cheap. You're getting wiped out. Like, tell that to the good folk who live in the communities who are being displaced by all that work elsewhere. Now, they tell you that globalization is over. Maybe. But let me tell you why that's so difficult. It can't be over. You can build all the factories you want in this country, but if the Chinese and the Germans and the Japanese and Koreans, if they insist on robbing wealth from their household communities and taking that, and what I mean robbing it, via the exchange rate vis-a-vis the dollar, okay? Chinese currency today is 720. Economically, to bring balance, to stop it pulling jobs out of this country, should trade at 4.5. I fear it's going to trade at 9. Well, that's another story, okay? So these mercantilist nations are enriching the central government at the expense of the household sector, right? That Bernanke, you might mention Bernanke in a minute and I'll have a heart attack. Talked about this global savings glut. That's the glut. This is almost like fascist governments screwing their own people because they can and because they want longevity in office. And they're dumping. The Chinese have dumped $5 trillion into the treasury market here. Now, if we were in the 19th century and we were financing locomotives and building canals and we had the chemical industry and the emerging telecoms, etc., we would need that. But this country can finance all of its investment needs from domestic sources. So when you drop $5 trillion, what do? You transform a wonderfully entrepreneurial society into a society where everyone's a speculator. Everyone needs their house price to go up or other assets. That's the decay, right? And the intelligentsia, the asses that govern you lot, applaud that. The experts are invested in the status quo. Guess what? They get rich and rich and rich. And the poor folk, well, they get the opposite. Who are the poor folk?
Hugh, are you saying that we are a speculative... We become speculators because we have the world's reserve currency and it's so strong and we're so expensive to all the rest of the world. We finance internally. What do we do with all this money? And it overflows into the financial markets. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it's a little bit like when we were talking about the repo eurodollar market. Money is like your DNA. It insists that you have lots of sex because it needs the expansion of its lineage. It doesn't really care for you. It just requires you as a vessel to pass it on and to pass it on and to pass it on. And money's like that. Money doesn't seek a deflationary environment and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to lend money to a steel producer in Milwaukee. It says, gee, the Nasdaq's going up. Cathy Wood's on fire. Boom. Right? That's how it works. And that Chinese and others holdings of treasuries, the Fed and the Treasury over that period beginning at the start of the century, we needed investment. Investment, like real investment in the US peaked with the Nasdaq. Investment in absolute terms today is no more than it was 22 years ago. It's a disgrace. Your infrastructure is appalling. And you had all of this free money, and the intelligentsia chose not to do anything with it, and therefore you had this appalling hollowing out of your society, which now gives you, the bifurcation that you have in the politics, the anger. I would say to you, I need to add, I think in the future we will add something onto Friedman's notion that inflation is and everywhere will be a monetary phenomenon. I believe it's a psychological phenomenon. One of the misunderstood aspects of Weimar was what a fractured society. The Northerners hated the Southerners, the Westerners hated the Easterners, the Catholics, the Protestants, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you got the assassination of one politician where the promise was he could bring them together. And when you have that chaos, that's when you challenge the sanctity of contracts. Everyone wants to buy US treasuries because at the heart, this is a free, democratic system where contract law is applied evenly. And you can't say that else. We can't even say that in Europe. That's why they want to buy it. So anyway, Dan.
Yeah. So Dan. I don't think I got my question about oil answered.
Oh, the oil, the oil.
I was waiting, man. I was waiting.
Premature tightening. Premature tightening by J1 in 2017-18.
Right.
Misjudged, wrong again, which led to the absolute destruction in the high-yield credit market. You went from trading 97 to trading 27 or 17. Who were the biggest? Who was taking on the credit? The shale oil guys. Okay. Federal Reserve policy tightening reflexively have made the people who then, the credit providers who got wiped out in that 18-month period, they're like, hey guys, we like your spunky entrepreneurial endeavors, but you know what? Just pay the debt back. Do not expand. So the Federal Reserve's actually, in its actions, is preventing, the oil price has been high. You can make money here.
Yep.
Where's the great expansion in supply? Well, it's waiting for the creditor to say, well, hold. So that's an example of where it holds back. So you're using monetary policy now to try and resolve and cure political problems and not economic problems. And that's, again, it just seems like a profound waste of time.
So long oil? It sounds like I can be long oil.
Well,
because that structural thing is going to have to work out.
Sure.
I mean, it's not going to take.
But that's a bit like saying it's 2008 is approaching, and you're like, what's a safe asset?
Right.
Gold. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, when the storm hits, and when there's a need to liquidate, you'll liquidate anything to save your ass.
Right.
And gold traded 1,000 to 570. Okay. So for me, we talked about the Fed put. Let's see if it exists. The Fed's like, nope. Not with this inflation. So, because previously, 20% was the wide. When J1 went, yeah, okay, I was only joking with hiking rates. You got me. Okay, well, we've been 25. No motion. So is it 30? Is it 40? For sure, the capital markets will go to those levels and knock on the door. Are we doing anything yet? No. Okay, I'll come back. Lower and lower and lower. So I'd want to be, before I wanted to, you don't have to be at all times invested. That's a speculation on my part. I would speculate that I don't have to be invested at this point in time. It would be, obviously, I made my, I was going to say reputation for insanity in 2008. I made 50% in the month of October. Paul Tudor Jones made 50% in the month of October back when we had that famous 20% decline in the Dow and was appointed a genius. I was just appointed an idiot. But I made that on a bear steepening between the 2's 10. We're back. We have lots of data. That's a fixed income trader, works on data. You're on the wides. If I'm right and lots of bad deflationary things happen, if the market's chapping on the door saying, Fed, are you going to do your put thing? Right? Well, that's rates less than 1%. So you get a massive expansion in that spread in your favor. I'd be tempted with that.
All right. So we have a little bit of time left if anybody wants to ask a question. Do we have some microphones handy? And you can throw your hand up. I see a hand over here. I see one over here. Whoever gets there first, right here.
Does Bitcoin fix this?
Crypto might fix it. I've repeatedly used the depression word. It would seem that there is a convention. We discovered during COVID that with social platforms and media, there's some words you're not allowed to use. In financial media, you're not allowed to use depression.
Right.
When did you last read that word in the Wall Street Journal? Okay. Thankfully, we've not had that many depressions. 1830, 1870, 1930. No. Each time, the rescue, the exit, was an advance, was a monetary technology, a monetary evolution, which created money, which gave you the expansion. So maybe, can I conceive of how that works? Ish. You know, I mean, I've got 9 million of bank borrowings from French banks, and yeah, it's all about trust. I don't trust you. You don't trust me. We have to write. There must be a warehouse the size of Paris with all of the banking documents that I signed. Okay, so blockchain, etc. I can see we make it quicker. As you make it quicker, and you take confidence and trust levels higher. Maybe that's like a monetary expansion. Maybe, but I'm still trying to sketch that out. Bitcoin is something else. Bitcoin is a speculative asset. Bitcoin is a wonderful asset in an inflationary asset bubble. We saw that. We're no longer in an inflationary asset bubble. And maybe gold should take the lead. But gold is very much tied to real rates. And there's an argument that 2% real, you'll start, I mean, you know, the market's been a little bit, equity market's been a little bit stronger the last 3 days or whatever, who cares, right? If you wanted to give that credibility, almost $1 trillion of repo failures, people coming into the Swiss central bank, 18 banks demanding dollars, the yen weakness is like Fed, hello, like trouble in repo land. So, you know, maybe.
All right.
Fascinating commentary, thank you. And this is sort of a statement question based on things I've read, and I'm trying to still understand to this day. In the macroeconomic world, they talk about that inflation is the system's way of financing massive innovation and improvements that ultimately deliver productivity. Meanwhile, I look at that and I say, okay, so does that counter to, or is it required in what's going on with the next 10 or 20 years or 30 years of global demographics?
Well, demographics will send me to sleep. Yeah. But to your point, yes, the wisdom of all of the wisdom, but the one that I got was your beginning statement. But why did the 1920s end so disastrously? Why do we no longer have the gold standard? Because there were two cheats in the international community. Two nations gamed the damn system. You lot, the America, and of course the damn French. It's always the damn French, right? Now, the gold system worked. Gold, you're running a current account, you're running a trade surplus. You attract physical gold into your economy. Think of gold as high-powered money. It's an additional banking reserve that, a bit like the Fed's bank reserves, but it's a bull market. The economy is boom, you can make money lending. And so you are adding fuel onto a domestic boom. And the idea is you make the recipient of the gold uncompetitive such that the system swings back and favors the Brits in the 1920s. The Brits were in a profound depression. And the Germans, everyone was in a profound depression, except for the French and the Americans. But they wouldn't allow the process of mean reversion because the Feds came in and they sterilized the gold. It never reached the banking system. Now, we don't really see that because the banking system is like, well, whatever. Like we've had, again, like Bitcoin, crypto, we had checking. You know, you could be in California, your bank's in New York, but you want to go to town. And they send a telegraph, hey, we've got Mrs. Smith, she wants a line. Yeah, it's cool. Monetary expansion. And then, so even with the sterilization, the US became at the end slightly uncompetitive. And so gold started to, as it's meant to, leave the system. And the New York Fed then raised interest rates, blind to the fact that the banking system was tipping. We got the Depression. Okay. How similar is that today? We're not on a gold standard. We're on a dollar standard. And the Chinese economy has boomed, 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 but they've sterilized all of the high-powered money. And they rolled it all up, and they've thrown it back. And they've created waves of what I would call a deflation for the rest of the world. How does that end? Well, in the States, you had the you had the Florida housing bubble. Well, I mean, we've got a 90 trillion elephant over there in China. What is the denouement? Not sure. Possibly it's that what we're seeing in the yen, which is now coming in and hitting the renminbi. It's on its weakest year. I mean, if the renminbi goes to 9, Treasury bond yields will be less than 1%. It's a mad max. The deflation, if they go 9, 10, but let me tell you, NAFTA was 94. And the Chinese were allowed to devalue into that to 9. It's nearly 7.5 today. What if we go back to 9? The deflation and what it does, the pain that inflicts on this nation, huge.
Wow. Well, if the Florida housing bubble of the 20s is analogous to what's in China, the numbers are going to be a little different this time around. They're going to be a little bit bigger. But we are, I'm sorry?
No.
Yeah. We're at the end of our time, and I'm not sure what my purpose was up here, but I think it was to
really
sit on the
quick
end
question,
of my,
really insistent quick question.
Oh, you got one?
I've got one more
right,
answer.
One more.
Will the Fed rate have to be higher than the inflation rate to tame inflation?
No. That would be the case if we were talking about domestic bank lending boom. That would be the case. That is not the case, okay? And what you're not seeing, again, is the destruction in money supply as collateral collapses, right? You're seeing a profound, the UK gilts. UK gilts, supposedly the third most riskless asset in the universe, they almost halved in an afternoon. And you want to buy Russell 2000 stocks? Conjecture, so it is the effect of putting very high carry onto a very, very leveraged system, which requires marginal collateral sales when there's no liquidity, and then prices take the shock lower and lower and lower. That collateral is money, and collateral is being destroyed Money is being destroyed. It's an invisible money, but it's still money. That's my point. Anyway, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hugh.